أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Dear guests and dear viewers of Bichri TV, my name is Bineta, a host of Focus with Bineta. Today, we are coming yet another week to present to you the topic we've been discussing since past week regarding the history of slavery, the history of Muslims, the history of Black America. Last week was a very fruitful show with our guest, Mr. Jibijan. We've revisited really the past and revisited few concepts that our children have been taught in regards to the history of Black people in the United States of America. And as we move forward, we plan to really take the lenses and shift the focus and really showcase how Islam got to the Americas. So as we went from who discovered America, how America was discovered, whether it was Christopher Columbus or even the Vikings, as we've seen. But also we moved towards the different explanations that happened to how Africans were proven to access the Americas even before Christopher Columbus, and the role that Islam played into discovering America through the guides that accompanied Christopher Columbus. Today, we are just taking that conversation and moving it a little bit further with my guest again, Mr. Jibijan, and through Bichri TV, our network. Again, I am reminding everyone, if you'd like to view this show or past shows, feel free to visit us on YouTube, Facebook. We are also on Periscope. You can also download the application for Bichri TV through the App Store or the Marketplace as well. Bichri TV is an Islamically oriented news channel. Any month we are streaming and we are having over 14 million views discussing about politics, religion, socio-economical issues, anything that has to touch the Muslim lives, our daily Muslim lives. We'll be discussing it here at Bichri TV. So without further ado, we'll just jump right into our show today. And we plan to really pick up where we left off from last week. Last week, we stopped at how the slaves arrived finally in a very painful way, showing the pictures of the ships that housed all the slaves and took them from Africa all the way to the Americas. We will revisit that video just to refresh in our mind, and then we will jump deeper into the subject with other videos of Muslim slaves and how did they make it to the America, how did they live here, with our guest, Mr. Jibijan. Mr. Jibijan, assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah, Sokhna Binta. Thank you for having me again. And we are looking forward to having a wonderful show. And
Thank you.
Also...
yes, Mr. Jibi?
Yes, I also want to say hello to Mr. Majamo and all the crew behind that are helping for the recording of the show.
Thank you so much. And in a true New Yorker fashion, we were able to hear a little bit of the noise of New York. So we really thank all our viewers from New York City. We have a lot of viewers from New York, and this is an occasion for us to really show them our gratefulness from Bichri TV to all of you over there in New York. And thank you to all of the encouragement we've received from people around the world, really following Bichri TV on a daily basis. So thank you so much for, being faithful viewers of the channel. So, Mr. Jibi, last week we really had a very fruitful conversation about before Christopher Columbus. What can you tell me in a summary, in a nutshell, about what we discussed last week?
Yes, we revisited we had a survey, a historical survey of the presence of Africans here in the Americas, but we have seen throughout the history that Africans have been, overlooked. Their presence, their contribution have been overlooked in the history books. So, but some research have been digging into explaining what has happened prior to the arrival of the Europeans here. So, and there have been a lot of information, a lot of evidence out there pointing to the presence of Africans even way before we talked about the Upper Antiquity, where the world were more connected than during the Middle Antiquity or Lower Antiquity, and before the arrival of Arabs into Europe, that have allowed a reconnection of the world that projected Europeans to come to Americas. But before that, the world have existed, and as we know, the world went through cycles of also, like I mentioned, the European Dark Ages, and before that, and during that time, the world hasn't stopped, going around or moving around. So people have been moving, and Africans have been, at the onset of, moving from continent to continent, and there are many archaeological findings, a lot of linguistic archaeology findings, and cultural archaeology findings, and all that pointing to the fact that of the presence of Africans here throughout the Americas. We're talking about from Canada all the way to the tip of South America.
Wow, amazing. And thank you so much for that reminder. Mr. Jan, it's really a travesty to see what has happened with our ancestors, but I think the real travesty here is the fact that our children are not being taught this historical fact, especially about the role that Africans and Muslims played into the while discovering America here. What can you tell me about the relationship between Africa, Muslims, and America before we get to our first piece?
We can focus as a starting point to the arrival of Muslims, slaves in the Americas. So that history started like the history of slavery in North America. So if you wanna, we can because that history of Muslims' presence in the Americas, it started in South America. As you know, Muslims, the Portuguese and the Spanish were the first to bring slaves in the Americas, and as you know, their colonies is in South America. But later on, when the British and the French, and they started, gaining traction and dominating the Atlantic slave trade, they started bringing slaves into their colony. But it is said that among the 500,000 slaves that were brought in the United States, 24% of them were Muslims, because it came a time when Muslim slaves were preferred and to other slaves because they were docile. It is said, people said that Muslim colonizers preferred plantation owners. They pick Muslims instead of non-Muslims. Yes, because they were very yes. But that's not the case. That's not the case. I was saying that's not the case in South America, in Brazil, where we saw as early as 1531 there were Muslim there were revolts, and rebellions that were instigated by Muslims. So there are more history, more documentation, more evidence of rebellions and revolts that were instigated by Muslims in Brazil than any place else.
And you know what, Mr. Jan, that's really a very interesting fact, given the fact that in Islam we are taught submission, but also just good conduct in the general facet. And as you were saying that, I was just reminded, still having a good conduct, being disciplined, even while you're being tried. So it reminded me when you said that Muslim slaves were seen to be more docile. It just reminded me of the character that a Muslim should have when being tried. And I could definitely, it gives me chills right now just to think about that, during slavery, and, just to see the precarious conditions that the slaves were in, and the situation that they were living in, they were able to still carry themselves in a way that people will still see that. So that's very powerful. I want to remind everyone that Mr. Jibijai is a historical researcher, a professor in English, a member, and a member of the Murid Islamic community in America, a very dear host for us, and we are very grateful to have him here to share his knowledge. He's been researching and reading about the history for many, many years now. Hopefully one day he'll be able to share with us. I'm interested, Mr. Jan, to knowing really your book list. I want to just come to your home and really dig inside those books and see what kind of books you hide in there. It's going to be very rich.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
But before we move any further, I wanted to bring our first video, which was our last video in the other show, but it's kind of like a transition just to show people how slaves were brought to the United States. So we'll go to our production team so they could take us away to revisit the trip from Africa to America. Shows you some of the history behind slavery and how our ancestors were packed like sardines, really, like people that didn't have no life or no rights, and just brought to the United States. Mr. Jan, can you please narrate the conditions in which the slaves arrived here in the Americas?
Yeah, that image that you saw, as you saw it in the video, those slaves were disembarked in Virginia, in Jamestown. Jamestown is the first colony, the first British colony. Don't get confused about the Mayflower and the Father Pilgrims in Boston. Those were persecuted by the Inquisitions during, persecution of Catholics by the Anglican Church. So those were not considered as they were not considered as England, from England. So the first colony was Jamestown. So these slaves, as you see, they were robbed. The British, they attacked the Portuguese, the Spanish or Portuguese slave ship, and robbed the cargo of slaves from them, and then from there 20 arrived in Virginia. So as you can see in these images, so Virginia, then Jamestown, and then later Virginia became the largest slave market and port of in the United States. That's from Virginia, where all cargoes landed, and buyers, planters, buyers, they would come and buy and just take their cargo to their plantations. So this happened in 1619, right? 1619. That's when that Jamestown colony was founded, with a lot of difficulties, of course, and they prior to that, they tried to use human labor in the Indians, and some they requested human labor from the British Crown and things like that. But it didn't work out. But first, they saw that the Portuguese and the Spanish were using black people in their plantations in Latin America. That's what also induced the British colonizers to start importing black people.
You know, and it's truly sad. And thank you so much for bringing us back and really sharing with us those details. Mr. Young, I wonder what was the adaptability of the slaves once they come here, and what was really the makeup of the slaves? Is there any researches that shows how, you know, they were taken from Africa, whether they were taken from West Africa, Central Africa, South Africa? What can you tell me about the makeup of the first slaves that came into the land?
Good point. As you know, slaves came from different parts, various parts, but they first started coming from West Africa, Senegal first, because Senegal, as you can see in the map, is the closest to Europe with regards to you know, geography. So the first.
Hopefully we'll get the map on
Yes. If the first, it is said that the first, according to Sylvian Diouf, because I read it in his book Servants of Allah, the first that the Spanish snatched were like 20 slaves in West Africa. They snatched them from the Wallo Kingdom, and they took them to Spain and kept them there for a couple of years. You know, they assimilated them. They were just seen, they were not used in any hard labor or whatever. They were just used like pet, like exotic pets. You know, people would come and see them as exotic animals from distant places. And the Portuguese also, they did the same. And the first slaves to be shipped in Latin America, in the colonies of Spanish colonies and in Brazil, they were from Senegal, right? So and mind you, Haiti back then was Hispaniola. It belonged to the Spanish. So the first slaves to land in Haiti, they were Senegalese. The first slaves to land in Brazil, they were Senegalese too. You got Wolof, you got Fulani, you got. Yes.
Mr. Jan, when you say Senegalese, are you saying they were Senegalese nationality or they just came off of the coast of Senegal?
Yeah, we will say the Senegambia, not Senegal, but then it was not called like Senegal. So we will say the Senegambia, but it's from the kingdoms of Wallo and Jollof and Tekru. So they were Wolof, they were Serer, they were Mandingo, if you want, and Wolofs. So those were the first one. And I was mentioning to you as early as 1531 in Bahia, Brazil. So they fermented, the Wolofs fermented a protest, a revolt, you know, trying to kill their masters, and the police, the army. They attack the barracks, and what is amazing is during those revolts, people get really prepared as if they were going to jihads. After the end of when the rebellion was stopped, you know, people will find that they have amulets, that they were wearing clothes with Arabic writing on them. And they had like they had books for protection and all that. So as if they were like preparing for jihad, because most of them they had this warrior spirit, and since most of them were Muslims, and most of the war, the political, you know, there were political and religious war that has been going on, and most of them if they got caught during those wars, they were sold to slave drivers. Yes.
Wow, that's really amazing. Thank you. And I think you just opened the door to really the core of our subject, which was to bring the history behind discovering America, but also to bring the history behind how the slaves got to the America. But the core of our topic really is whether those slaves that came here were Muslims what kind of religion did they have when they come? To hear you talk, Mr. Jan, it looks like really the main religion for the slaves were Islam, for a lack of a better word, if there is any other religion that we saw at that time.
Yeah, you can say that, but not all slaves were Muslims, of course, because Islam was at its was located specifically to certain areas in West Africa. So when we talk about West Africa, all until the late the 17th century, 18th century, when the slave trade intensified, more and more people were embracing Islam so that they can look for, protection and a refuge. So because the kings and like the aristocracy, the elite, aristocratic elite ruling the countries and kingdoms, they were in favor of, since everyone living under their purview were their subjects, they own them, so they can like just snatch them
There
and
we
sell
go.
them. So and then Europeans were already dealing and trafficking in slaves, so they had to get into the business. So that's how they enrich themselves. That's how they got weapons. That's how they got clothing, European style clothing, and how they got alcohol, especially. That's how they got alcohol and stuff. But you had like these religious leaders who were against that. So that's how mainly it started. So whoever beats
Great.
its enemy will capture the slaves, warriors, and then sell them to the Europeans.
Just like a bounty of war. So they were treated as bounty of war. Our production team did a very good job in showing us the geographical area where first slaves were taken from. The red dot you see in the screen represents Senegal, and the surrounding area would represent West Africa, where most of the slaves were coming from. You can see from this map, Mr. Diagne, that it's a direct line, it looks like, from Senegal, West Africa, going to the United States was kind of like a shorter trip rather than going around the world to access, the Americas. So that could be also one of the reasons. But before we go any further, let's see the first video, our next video, which will really set us into the environment I want us to be in, which is to talk about the role that Muslims had in America, in building the country, in slavery, and more. When we come back, we'll discuss more about the roles of Muslims in America.
Sure.
Let's see how early Muslims arrived in the U.S.
The story of generations of people who felt the lash of bondage, the shame of servitude, the sting of segregation, but who kept on striving and hoping and doing what needed to be done so that today I wake up every morning in a house that was built by slaves. And I watch my daughters, two beautiful, intelligent black young women, playing with their dogs on the White House lawn.
Now, what is your name?
Saeed.
How is your name? Now I'll ask you again. Tell me your name.
starting with the former First Lady. But I was just saying that those are some very powerful images, starting with our former First Lady, Miss Michelle Obama, really reminiscing about the White House, which represents the biggest symbol here in the United States of America, where the President of the United States is holding all of his duties. And for her to say it was built by slaves means a lot. What are the role of the Muslim slaves? Mr. Jibi Janius said earlier that Muslim slaves were present here from the beginning and really showed bravery. And some reports will say they were docile, but in this video we also saw that sometimes they were disobedient and arrogant, as it was reported by the white master. However, as we move forward, we will see a different view and the true character of how Muslim slaves were portrayed. Mr. Jibi, what do you think about this this testimony we saw from Americans, of contemporary Americans, remembering the slaves as they were?
Yeah, it is. It is very. It is a subtle issue now that African slaves, they built America because they were free labor. They were being used to work in all projects, and that shows you also that they have a background, which means they were not taught the skills when they came here. So which means they brought the skills with them. They were from all type of background. So and mind you, the White House is one example that First Lady could talk about, and everyone knows the story of the White House when it was built. So, and it's not only the White House. You got other mansions, throughout the South, and that were built by Muslims too. They were, but still, they were not given their rightful place, and they were not recognized as equal to anybody else living in this land. They were like the least recognized, acknowledged group of people living in the United States, and that is still going on. But now fast forward, you've heard former President Clinton during his presidency, during his years, talk about his discourse that echo the place that Muslims have occupied or have been given, even if it's not recognized. But he was saying there that Muslims have been a part of the American fabric, since
Absolutely.
even before the founding fathers, because they were here before them. Some of the founding fathers, they were born while Muslims were already here, like Ayub Suleiman. He was brought in the United States in 1729, and back then, if you look, most of these presidents or most of these leaders of the revolution or who wrote the independence of the United States, they were very young, right? So that's the point that you have to look at it, and just that's what will take you to understand that Muslims have been part of the American fabric even before the independence of this country, and they've been here, and they've witnessed all the up and downs of throughout the history of the United States. So therefore, they should be given, recognition and be considered and looked as a part of the American fabric.
MashaAllah, thank you so much, Mr. Diagne. I know that, quite frankly, we discussed also the presence of Abu Bakr Mansa And on the last show, we also discussed about the testimonies that was given by Native Americans when Christopher Columbus himself wrote it in his diary that he was told that Muslims were here and Africans were here. So that just goes back to join what you were saying regarding the presence of Muslims even before the forefathers were here. Let's go ahead and move a little bit further and find out what kind of Muslims came in the early America. What were their behaviors? Do we have any names? Do we have any faces? Those are questions that our children are asking themselves every day. So we'll go with our production team and see some of the faces of the early slaves that were Muslims.
A one-of-a-kind manuscript written by a slave has now been preserved in the Library of Congress. The Arabic language autobiography spent decades in private collections before the library acquired it in 2017. Now it has been digitized for the world to read. And Amna Nawaz reports on the manuscript's remarkable journey for our ongoing arts and culture series, Canvas.
Born and raised in West Africa, Omar ibn Saeed was 37 years old when he was kidnapped and taken to America as a slave in the 1800s.
Before I came to the Christian country, my religion was the religion of Muhammad.
His autobiography in his native language of Arabic is believed to be the only one of its kind, the original words of a Muslim American slave.
Then there came to our place a large army who killed many men and took me and brought me to the Great Sea.
His literacy and culture completely goes against, abolishes, or one might say annihilates the narrative that slaves were not capable of culture. In fact, they were persons with distinct histories, abilities, culture, and background.
Allah al-Rais has studied and translated the words of Omar ibn Saeed.
They sold me into the hands of the Christians, who bound me and sent me on board a great ship, and we sailed upon the Great Sea a month and a half, when we came to a place called Charleston.
He was wealthy, and he was highly educated, because in his autobiography he speaks about spending 25 years studying.
Mary Jane Deeb is the chief of the African and Middle East Division at the Library of Congress, where Ibn Said's manuscript now lives.
So there was a man who's caught at the age of 37, and shipped off to South Carolina, in a country he doesn't know, among people whose language he doesn't know.
Ibn Said wrote he was sold to a, quote, small, weak, and wicked man called Johnson. After years of abuse, he fled, but was caught in North Carolina.
He is then captured and brought to a jail cell, and he begins to write on the walls of his jail cell in Arabic. So that attracted attention of pretty important people, because the man who ends up buying him and releasing him from jail was the brother of the governor of North Carolina.
Over time, Ibn Said converted to Christianity. In his 60s, he wrote his own story, but only in Arabic.
It's written in Arabic, and so his masters could not really read it at all. They could not really influence its writing. And so it was really his exact words, unfiltered by the machinery of the editorship of masters and abolitionists, as other slave narratives were.
A machinery al-Rayas says erased countless narratives, including the fact that up to 20% of Africans enslaved in America were Muslim. Ibn Said, in fact, chose to open his autobiography with a verse from the Quran.
The crux of this Quranic chapter is that it's only God who has the possession and the ownership, both of human beings and of things. And therefore, it seems to me a kind of a hidden text. What Omar is saying is that you guys have no right to own me here.
It's a narrative that challenges the original concept of who the slaves were when they came here. That they didn't really have a system of belief. They were uncultured. They didn't have a written system. This is what he brings to the table, and basically says that is who we really are.
But before those pages written by Omar ibn Said could be shared with the rest of the world, conservators here at the Library of Congress worked for months behind the scenes to bring those pages back to life.
We're trying to present the item as close to what it looked like at the time as possible.
Sylvia Albro led the effort to rescue the nearly 200-year-old manuscript. The materials themselves, she says, tell us even more about the life of Omar ibn Said.
It's actually surprising that the quality of paper for his manuscript is really pretty good. The fact that he had at his disposal good quality materials is an indication of the respect that he had as a figure, even as a slave.
That respect brought Ibn Said to the attention of prominent abolitionists, missionaries, and linguists at the time, who translated his story and used it in their fight against slavery. The entire manuscript is now available online for a new generation to read Ibn Said's words for themselves. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Amna Nawaz in Washington, D.C.
In fact, this was really, really an important piece to see the respect that Omar ibn Said received. And also really the findings of these books, the defiance that you could see where he claimed his autonomy as a human being, even in Arabic, writing in his first words that only Allah, God, has dominion over my soul and my body. That's very powerful. Mr. Jibijan, what can you tell me about Omar ibn Said?
Thank you. Very important question. Omar ibn Said, as you can see, he's portrayed here as Muslim slaves who was owned by a family who, have had to not make him work as a slave in the field or anything. He was in the house living with them and so many things, so many good things that he himself has said when he wrote his autobiography about his family. And as you can see, he was able to write an autobiography in Arabic, right? So that was the only autobiography in Arabic that was found. That autobiography was lost, and it resurfaced in 1995 when a collector bought a trunk that where he find it, right? So he didn't understand, and then he had to he had to get into touch with intellectuals or linguists in academia who helped him, and they found out that this is a very historical, important historical document because it documents the life of former Muslim slaves, who was Omar ibn Said. So he came from Senegal, right, from Fouta. So he wrote all that. And then researchers were able to trace his origins to Fouta, and they were able also to know during what battle, what war he got caught he was caught as a slave, war captive and sold to Europeans. And he also described. He's a crossing, and how long he stayed from where he was in St. Louis, and and how long it took them to cross, and where he got sold from there, and what happened next. He was able to document all that, and from a historical point of view, with regards to narratives of slaves, Omar ibn Said narrative and autobiography has set again, brought back the debate on what slave narratives were about, and who were able to control the narrative and all that, because his narrative was not controlled. His narratives were not written in English, or it was not dictated to an editor or a journalist or some ethnologist or historian belonging to American Colonization Society or American Ethnological Society. He was able to write his own history. Yes. So and then it was found out later that he was straightforward, and he used his own style, and he was able to document his life as a slave, but who were not used in the field and who were not given any hardship during his stay with this family. And he prayed for them in the autobiography, but he cursed he cursed his former master. He cursed him.
His first master.
And he cursed him. His first master who owned him in Charleston. So
now, Mr. Jack,
all that, yes.
I noticed that in the video it spoke about him being 37 years old, and I also heard in your narrative that he was caught in a battle, and that was documented. Can you come back to that and tell me if there is a name or like a year where the battle or place where that battle took place? And did we find any researches that show that he had a family in Africa?
With regard to his family, no. He didn't even mention them. He mentioned he's a Quranic teachers, where what he did during his lifetime. He went to school, where he went to school at, what he studied, and all that, describing all the aspect of the Muslim life that he led before he was captured. So he was captured during this battle that happened between Al-Mami Abdel Kader Khan, who was the Al-Mami of Fouta, of the theocracy of Fouta. That was founded by him and Charna Suleiman Bao, who was considered. They were considered as the revolutionaries who put an end to the Denyang Kobe regime, who installed slavery, and that battle took place because many of his co-religionists living in Bundu, Khaso, Karta, Nyani, Wuli, present day like Tamba, Kunda, in that area of Senegambia, south of Senegal. So they had like political disagreement with him. So they formed a coalition and they attacked him. And Omar ibn Said, he even mentioned the arrival of a large army, that they attacked us one day. A large army arrived and they attacked us. That's during that battle that I was caught as a slave. He said that. So that battle was that battle that, and it happened in 1806. Yes, that happened in 1806. So Omar ibn Said arrived here in December. Yes.
Go ahead. Yes, I'm gonna let you finish real quick.
Yeah, I was saying Omar ibn Said arrived. Yes, just Omar ibn Said arrived here on December 31st, 1807. On January 1st, 1808, the United States of America banned the slave trade, and his ship is the last ship that entered the waters before the legal trade of slavery was banned by the United States Constitution. So that's in a nutshell the story of Omar ibn Said.
Thank you so much. I think this really deserves like a special edition where we just need to zoom into his life and bring more details about it. Unfortunately, time is of the essence right now, and we'll just move to our next video talking more about the faces of the early slaves that were Muslims in the Americas. So let's see our next piece real quick.
It's not an ordinary portrait. It's called The Fortunate Slave, and it was painted in 1734 by the English painter William Hall. On the surface, it might look like a typical English painting, but what's really special about it is that amongst all the paintings of famous English men and women of the 18th century, This is the very first in which the subject is black. And once you know the story of its subject, Ayuba Suleiman Diallo, you'll see what makes this painting extraordinary. Born and raised in eastern Senegal to a prominent Muslim family, Diallo was known for his great intelligence and memory from a young age. By the time he was 15, he had memorized the entire Quran and familiarized himself with the Maliki school of Islamic law. Unfortunately for Diallo, his life quickly changed, from one of study and scholarship to the horror of slavery. Senegal was a major victim of the transatlantic slave trade, and by the age of 30, he was captured, enslaved, and shipped to the United States. Despite the cruelty and abuse he faced, Diallo remained devoted to his Islamic rituals, going into nearby woods to pray 5 times a day. After a child humiliated him and threw dirt in his face during prayer, Diallo decided to flee the plantation, only to be recaptured and imprisoned. Diallo decided to write a letter from prison to his father in Africa. This letter was intercepted by James Edward Oglethorpe, the director of the Royal African Company and the founder of the American colony of Georgia. Upon reading it, Oglethorpe wrote that he was touched by Diallo's words and arranged that Diallo was to be freed and sent over to England. When Diallo arrived in 1733, he was greeted as a free man amongst the people of England. He made friends in the circles of the elite and would often debate with Christian priests and bishops. At a time known for its extreme racial prejudice, people were impressed with his intelligence, monotheistic beliefs, and piety. Diallo was approached by William Hall to paint his now famous portrait. What makes this portrait significant is not just the presence of a black man, it's the way he's depicted. When people of African descent were painted in the 18th century, they were almost always shown in racist and demeaning ways.
Wow, that
Facial
is amazing.
features were exaggerated
We can see
unnaturally, and they were never the subject of the painting, usually being reduced to the background as scary and inhuman figures. This portrait was the first to depict an African Muslim ex-slave as not only human but noble. His posture and frontal direction were chosen to make him more likable, and his expression is pleasant rather than evil or disturbed. However, what really stands out is the red book hung around his neck. This book is one of 3 Qur'ans Diallo had written purely from memory during his imprisonment. In many ways, this portrait sums up his incredible story. A profoundly religious West African man, enslaved and abused, who won respect and freedom from a society that believed he was inferior, and who throughout his years in slavery never lost pride in his identity as a black Muslim.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah, truly inspiring to see the resilience in the African Muslims that we saw that were held as slaves. Mr. Jan, real quick, as we see these 2 pieces that really showcase the Muslim slave as dignified, as somebody who's resilient, the underlying message I really see here is that the Muslim slaves were really literate, they were dignified, but also they had a lot of perseverance. What can you tell me about their character and how that contributed to their survival?
Yes, that I will start with the last word you said there, survival. So that their background, their intellectual background, they being Muslims who know another language, which is Arabic, and they know how to write it. You know, those were given more status and recognition than others who did not have those skills, or who didn't have that baggage. So that was a plus. That was a plus value for Muslims who were able to write in Arabic, even their own language, on top of learning Arabic and knowing how to write it. And it was very extraordinary how you saw that the example of Ayub Ben Suleiman, who was actually the first to return to Africa. So, and he was lucky enough. He even didn't spend like 2 years in the United States before returning to Africa. And he was able to convince his masters that his father could bail him out. He could pay them money or gold, whatever you want, because I'm from a rich family. My father is able to buy my freedom from you guys, and that happened in the early decades of the 18th century. So he arrived here around 1732 at age of 31, and by 1733 his plea to return to Africa was heard by that you heard it on the video, Oglethorpe, who sponsored him. Yes, who sponsored him, took him to England, and on his way to England he was able to learn quickly English enough to be able to tell his story and about his people, where he came from, about his land, about his culture, all that, and he was able to meet even the royal circles in England when he went there, and he was very likable person. If you look at the face here, this is a face of a man who was very dignified and who know. If you look at him, the painter, he did not, paint him as somebody who was of a lower class or anything. And what he's wearing, he had to tell the painter, wait, I'm gonna wear my Muslim garb, my Muslim, yeah. And he came back, as you saw him when he came back, and he was the painter was able to capture all the features that came about, that reflected also an inner character that was very dignified and very courageous. And he was able to go back to Africa, and his story was told, his autobiography was written, and with some flavor of the style that the Europeans, the Americans wanted it to look like, giving it that flair and that flavor that they wanted to show to their readers and to capture their attention. Yes.
Absolutely. I think that right now we're running out of time, but this is such an important piece that we definitely have to come back and revisit really the story of Ayub Ibn Sulaiman and then just discuss more about it. But very shortly, we were able to see really the dignified view that Muslim Americans, early Muslim slaves had when they were here in the United States, in America, and during the slavery. I think we're going to end it right there. I know we don't have enough time to really discuss it extensively, but next show we will be coming in to discuss more about the states of Muslims and how did they evolve during the slavery in early America. Again, this is Bichri TV, Focus with Sokhna Binta. You can watch it every Saturday at 7 p.m. through Facebook, through YouTube, through our Bichri channels. You can download the Bichri app through the App Store or the Marketplace, and you can follow us as we discuss real life issues for Muslims, but also the historical aspect of Islam here in the United States, discussing politics, healthcare, social issues, anything that has to do with immigration, anything that has to do with our life here in the United States. Will be coming again next week to discuss that. Mr. GB, real quick, I'm going to let you share with us your last words, and really, what else do you want to share about the faces of these early slaves? And also, my last question to you: are there any more slaves that we can identify with that we can talk about next week?
Yeah, of course, there are so many out there, so Sister Binta. So you know that Grant is the Yes, these are some of the Muslim slaves that are mostly seen on screens and things like that. So there are many others. These are the Muslims who are identified here in North America, but you have other Muslim slaves who put themselves on the scene in Jamaica, in Bahamas, in Barbados, in Trinidad and Tobago, and the like, and in Brazil, especially in Brazil, where the first Muslims were shipped, first Muslim slaves were shipped at. And in Brazil, you have more documentations, more archives with regards to all anything or everything that Muslims have been involved in, from rebellions and revolts, or and the life they maintain. How they clung to their religion, to build communities, and to even create abolitionist movements. They were not recognized or acknowledged, but there is this Samba Makumba who was shipped from Senegal, and when he arrived in the island of in the Bahamas, he was able to create an association, that was freeing slaves. So I think also all those are part of the achievements that Muslims were able to create as a community here.
Absolutely. And that's very interesting. And hopefully next week we'll be able to dig deeper and really, bring those faces alive and then try to share that with our viewers. But it was really one full hour of very rich content. We thank you so much, Mr. Jibi. And hopefully next week we'll be able to come back with more topics about early slaves in early America.
Inshallah.
And I just want to thank all of our viewers for listening and watching, and really we invite you to join us every Saturday and next Saturday at 7 p.m. here at Bichri TV. You can also follow us on YouTube on our Bichri TV channel. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
mbokki jullit yi mbokki taalibe yi ñu leen di ziaré te di leen baalu àq te baal ñëpp àq te jiital ci ziar boobu ak nuyoo bu tedd boobu sëñ Muntaxa Mbakke yàlla na fi yàgg te ànd ak wér